Hi, Glenys.
Hey, Aaron. What do you want to talk about today?
How much I hate diets.
Yeah, diets suck.
So what do you do instead of a diet?
Intuitive eating. Health at every size.
So how many times have you had to explain intuitive eating and health at every size to someone?
Like 5,000 times. But that was just to my doctor.
Okay, so how many times have you explained it to someone and then they said, but diets are the only thing I know?
That's like every time. Can we pursue health without thinking about weight?
Yes, we can pursue health without thinking about weight.
That's pretty revolutionary, what you just said. But what if you just don't like yourself at the size that you're at?
I think we need to understand why, instead of just saying I need to change.
So, what's the deal with body positivity?
Oh man, that's a long answer. I'm Aaron Flores.
And I'm Glenys Oyston. And we are Dietitians Unplugged. Hey, welcome back. We're so excited to have you back for this this special part 2 episode. Aaron, how are you doing? For reals, how you doing?
For reals, we need such a new question. I'm good. We're still here, still going through all of this, and again, not much has changed over the past couple weeks, but happy that we put this into a 2-parter because there's a lot of brain stimulus in this episode, and I think allowing people to sort of sit with that first part and really like internalize it, I think makes this second part really very meaningful and like build on some of the concepts that Fiona is so eloquently shared with us.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we could have probably talked for 3 hours.
I think so.
But yeah, and she's just one of my favorite people to talk to, and I learned so much from her. But we did our best and tried to cut it off at, a certain amount of time because we all have to go back and live our lives when we're not podcasting. But this episode, I feel like we even said it, like we go deep.
Yeah.
And we really like question things about these concepts that we're talking about. And I kind of love it. I kind of love this episode.
Yeah, no, it's a real good one, and I think people are really excited to hear part 2. So let's not keep them waiting any longer. Here's part 2 of our interview with Fiona Sutherland.
Fiona, I just want to say, I love that you ask, is it okay if we do this? I'm like, Fiona, whatever you want to talk about is awesome.
And would it be awesome if we just say no? Nah, fuck this. Let's move on to something else.
We don't want to talk about that. Screw
Shut
you.
up. Yes.
Go back to the pub drinking. Let's go back to the pub drinking part.
But this is how, I mean, I think being in session with you is probably amazing where you're like, is it okay if we talk about this? And I love that you do that.
Oh, thank you, Glenys. Can I say, okay, so what this is for folks who might be thinking, why are you even asking permission? You're on somebody else's podcast, duh. So when we ask permission, it's about consent. It's about asking, is it okay? And that is one of the core elements of trauma-informed work. So a lot of folks who have not only experienced trauma, but experienced chronic stress, which is, I've really come to understand that as a form of trauma, if I'm honest. Yes, it might not be in our DSM criteria, but geez, yikes. I think it's on the spectrum of trauma for sure. What do you think about that?
Yes. Oh, totally. I mean, how our physiological response to it and how we're like constantly under it. No, it totally would make sense. And again, if I'm thinking about the stress of that and then weight stigma, no, it all makes sense to me.
Oh my God, yes. Chronic stress plus weight stigma equals just fucked.
Yeah.
Do you know how else do you say it? Like it's a big giant mess. It interrupts so many of the ways in which we can just live and survive. So I know that was a bit of a shortcut to what I think about things. Oh, that's fucked. But sometimes that's the way my brain works before I can make meaning of things. If we were to think about, let's get nerdy just for a minute. For those of you who are physiological nerds, a little bit like me. So when we're in times of chronic stress, remembering that chronic stress can be over a lifetime as well. So it can kind of peak and trough, but chronic stress is really over a long period of time. Our body releases lots of hormones which wreak absolute havoc on the body. And there's a part of our brain called the amygdala, which gets really, really activated. The point of the amygdala is to signal to us that something's wrong. It's like a smoke detector, so to speak. And so the amygdala does not concern itself whether something is actually wrong. It just takes its cue from us. So if we think something is wrong, whether that is feeling criticized or, going to the doctor and, your very valid pain being dismissed, for example, the amygdala sees that as a dangerous situation or a fear-inducing kind of situation. Same as bear in bushes, don't eat poisonous berries. Our brains have not evolved at all over time. So then there's another part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex, which is kind of behind our forehead, essentially, kind of in the middle of our brain. And that's the part of our brain which is responsible more for things like emotional processing, decision-making, memory, and learning. So when we're under times of stress, the prefrontal cortex kind of, it gets a bit left out of the game, so to speak, which is why at the moment, I don't know about you or people listening, but at the moment, I think to myself, things like, what day is it? Or like, why can't I make very simple decisions right now? Or, why am I going back to some old coping habits? And that's why, is because our prefrontal cortexes at the moment are really, the neurons are not really firing very well, and our amygdalas are on high alert. So to bring us kind of forward to mindfulness so that we can find meaning in the nerdiness, the way mindfulness kind of works, and research, many pieces of research support this, is that we can actually strengthen the neuronal connections or the neuronal pathways between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, which is essentially improve communication between those two parts of our brain, as well as increasing and improving prefrontal cortex function. So the prefrontal cortex can act to kind of calm down the amygdala. So think about it as like a superhighway. So if under times of stress, if our prefrontal cortex is not really sending cars to the amygdala, but the amygdala is red hot and firing, and there's lots of activity in the amygdala, the way that mindfulness practice, and so a lot of the research really has been on formal meditation, but I really believe that all forms of mindfulness can really improve the communication between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. So what happens is that the prefrontal cortex can become more active, I guess, and more responsive, and can send more cars down the superhighway down to the amygdala, so that the brain is getting more calming messages, and more like, no, we're okay, we are safe, it's okay, our life is not at threat, not at immediate threat. The ironic thing is with COVID-19, of course, is that there is a sense of our life being threatened, which is very real, right? So anyway, it's kind of a big giant mess when it comes to the ways in which our brain responds in times of stress. Yeah, so there you go, nerds unite.
That's awesome. So I have a question, sort of building on this, because thinking about ACT and thinking about the mindfulness and talking about emotions, I think there's a piece. This is, by the way, this is where I get the free counseling.
No worries.
In this portion of the podcast where Glenys gets her free counseling. But basically, but this is happening with a lot of my clients. Like, there are those of us who feel, or I shouldn't say feel, maybe I'm not that in touch with my feelings at times, but I feel fine. But then my body is just like turning to complete shit. Like the acid reflux is going, or like I'm yawning and I'm wanting to sleep all the time. And so I guess I want to go back to the mindfulness piece, or you mentioned like sensations in the body. Are there those of us who are like, listen, I'm not feeling, like, I tend to intellectualize a lot, so I'm not like super in touch immediately with feelings, or I might feel fine, but like I said, I know that when I'm experiencing acid reflux, that's stress. That is my stress response. I have spent enough time figuring my body out that it's telling me something. So how does mindfulness work for that kind of physical response that people might be having?
Yeah, you bring up such a good point, Glenys. So it is really not uncommon that, okay, so hang on a second. Let me pause here for a moment. Just so about 10 minutes ago, I said, our bodies and our minds will do anything to keep us safe. That is our main job in life, is to keep us safe and keep us alive. So, for example, intellectualizing is one way that our bodies attempt to keep us safe, because maybe feeling into the body doesn't feel safe. Intellectually, you know it's safe. Like, you know that you have a safe home to live in, you have people around you who can support you, you're very skilled generally. You know what I mean? Like, you're a very skilled person, you're a very competent person. So you know all this intellectually, but at the moment your body's like, Glenys, hello, hello. So it's sending you messages through acid reflux. A lot of people experience, for example, gastrointestinal symptoms, so IBS, headaches, pain, pain sensations. Or the coming back of experiences, or kind of old feelings, I guess, kind of pop up, whether they come up in somatic sensations or felt body sensations or memories, or there's a lot of old stuff that kind of comes up, and this is our body's very natural response to not feeling safe, even though our brain's like, you are safe, so from a cognitive or thoughts related perspective, that will only get us so far. So we can say to ourselves, we're safe, but unless we're also getting the felt sense of being and feeling safe, our bodies will continue to give us these messages that we're not safe. So in some ways, intellectualizing actually, I'm going to put myself out here and say I actually think it probably increases the disconnection between us and our bodies.
It totally does. Yes.
Yeah. Would you say?
Yes, it absolutely does. And I know that. And that's why I'm asking the question.
Yes.
How do I fix this? Absolutely, Fiona.
So when it comes to, for example, let's talk about body image here for a second. So, or body image healing. So when we think about what body image is, so the way that we perceive and think about, and not only our body's physicality, but then also the way we feel into the body, the way we feel in, the way we inhabit our body. So that comes along with thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions. So because our mind is not super creative, the way that we experience our body in the world, and the way we experience our body privately, they tend to be pretty similar. So we tend to experience kind of some similar sensations as you're explaining, Glenys. We tend to experience maybe a similar set of thoughts, a similar set of emotions, or maybe our emotions are dulled and dampened and not available to us. So the way that mindfulness can help with reconnecting our kind of cognitive selves or our thinking selves with our feeling selves is by inviting us to be more familiar, more friendly, more spacious with our experiences. So it invites us to respond differently. So I'll give you an example with your experience, Glenys. So let's say, for example, your reflux. Okay, so your reflux obviously would be very physically uncomfortable. The same as a flare up in IBS symptoms would be very physically uncomfortable. So when we tend to revert back to our thinking selves rather than our feeling selves, we we are less likely to be able to be responsive to those very wise symptoms that allow us to take care of our IBS or our reflux. So the decisions that we might make around that, we might it might not occur to us that we need to, for example, be maybe drinking a little bit more water, or maybe we need to go to the pharmacy to get some Tums, or whatever we might use to kind of to help settle down our reflux. And it also, I guess, mindfulness is a practice which really invites us to be kind towards our pain, rather than, oh, what have I done wrong this time? I can't believe these symptoms have come back. I'm such an idiot, and getting very frustrated with ourselves. So does that kind of make sense?
Yes. And can I tell you what I do to help this?
Please.
So this was a trick question, because I already do practice mindfulness when this happens. I just wanted everybody to hear you talk.
Gotcha. Just kidding.
No, but I really did want you to, talk about this. But I do, because what I learned a few years ago was this is a symptom of it has nothing to do with eating. I know this for me.
Yes.
It only comes up when I'm stressed out, chronically stressed, as you said. And what I learned is that mindfulness meditation is the only thing that can get me connected back with my body, and to show it some kindness,
love, kindness,
and calming. And it's like you said, intellectualizing can't make you feel safe. But somehow kind of sinking back into my body or giving it time to pause helps to bring that reaction down, that reactive reaction down. And so it's just a matter of making sure that I do it, which is always a little bit of a challenge.
Well, yeah, because it's hard.
Yes.
It's really hard, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like, what are your suggestions for people like me who are also like, well, I know that the mindfulness stuff really helps. Also, sometimes it feels like another thing to do, or it feels time consuming or burdensome. And that's the main barrier I might hear from my clients. But if I'm being honest, that's also my own barrier. Whereas it feels like yet another thing to have to do.
Oh my God. Yeah. Me too. I would say I'm an active mindfulness practitioner, practicer, whatever you say. For well over 10 years. I've been a yoga teacher for 5 years. Do you think I do full-on vinyasa flow every day? No.
Three times a day.
I do it 3 times a day because, like, I'm so into being perfect.
Because you're Amanda Chantal Bacon. No, just kidding.
That's right, exactly. So, no, my gosh, if I do a stretch and a breath, like mindfulness tick, yoga tick, like no, I'm so with you. And I think this is one of the things that's really dangerous about, not only social media, but also broader diet culture, is this sense of, if I'm going to do mindfulness, I need to do it perfectly. And can I just say right here and now on Dietitians Unplugged podcast, that is the biggest load of shit I have ever heard in my life. It's not something to perfect. It's not something that gets you to a certain place where you're sitting on a mountaintop. I mean, if you want to sit on a mountaintop and meditate, great, fantastic, and be in a cave for 3 years, great, that's fine. But it's not something to perfect, because that's when it becomes cumbersome. It's hard. Mindfulness is hard, not only finding the time and energy, but also shit comes up. Like, shit will come up for you. And if you're not ready for it, it can be really hard and very off-putting, because it's like, oh, crap. I'm now noticing sensations in my body that I didn't want to notice. I didn't want to come in contact with this at all. And the information that could be gleaned from that is, this is what I'm avoiding. These sensations is what I'm avoiding. These feelings is what I'm avoiding. Which brings us nicely back to acceptance and commitment therapy, because that's all about, kind of what are we avoiding, and how can we shift in the service of our values. But anyway.
All right. So I have a question based on that sort of answer, or that sort of point is part of this trauma-informed work, as I see it, is also respecting that for some folks, they might not be ready to be in their body, right? It might be completely unsafe to be in their body. So how do you, with that same lens, then talk about mindfulness and that and where they might feel in their body? And again, it's not safe. So we don't want them to go there, like actually validating, hey, I can understand why it's not safe. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. Do you know what, Aaron? Thank you so much. It's such a good point, and I concur with you 100%. Trauma-informed work, it's not trauma-focused work, just to be clear. Trauma-informed work is having an understanding about how trauma and chronic stress impacts the body and impacts our ability to sense into the body, and also, what kind of gets in the way. So remembering our body is always saying, survival, safety, repeat. Like that's the way our bodies and brains work. And if there's nothing else to remember from this conversation, it's that our bodies are wired for survival and safety, and it will do whatever it takes to help us feel safe. And sometimes that comes up in the form of disordered eating. Sometimes it comes up in the use of alcohol or drugs or gambling or, various kinds of behaviors which actually harm us. And sometimes they harm other people too, but it's in the service of safety. And so if we can look at things from that lens, I think it allows us just to find a little bit more compassion for our clients and compassion for us too. So your point around body safety is incredibly important. And the good news with mindfulness is you can titrate it. So I would never, ever, with any of my clients with eating disorders, I would never start with feeling into the body, ever. I would always start with using senses. So, for example, would it be helpful if I give you some examples around this?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So things like what I can see and what I can hear. And that would be step one. Step two would be naming, for example, something that I can see. So in my room at the moment, I can see a calendar, and I'm naming the calendar and practicing being able to name the object as a calendar without then going into analysis or critique. So I'm not necessarily going on to, and that's a pretty calendar, or, I haven't changed the month over. It's more just naming and then shifting on to, for example, the next object, which might be, I don't know, a pile of papers on the ground. I'm literally looking at my office right now, or a water bottle, or a pair of sunglasses. And so literally noticing, naming, shifting. Noticing, naming, shifting. And so what we're also what we're trying to build up is the skills in noticing, and then noticing the naming and noticing the shifting, if that makes sense. So we're trying to stay really present to actually just the very basic processes of our mind, and to stay present with that. It's a bit like brain training, to be honest. So I would just start off there. And
it sounds like a rhythm, right? It sounds like
it is.
Like, I just got to get into the rhythm of what this feels like, right? And the repetition of it, finding that, like I said, rhythm.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. And then maybe after senses, this is also very sensory, but if we were doing anything that kind of was, with curiosity to the body, we might start with something like pressing our feet into the ground and feeling that sense of how it feels, the changing sensation if I have relaxed feet. And this can be done sitting or standing, or even lying, I guess. If we're lying on our back with our knees bent up, then we can press our feet into the ground. How does that sensation feel if my feet are relaxed and just resting on the ground versus pressing into the ground? And so we're noticing change in sensation. So I would never do, for example, even appetite awareness work before I feel comfortable and my client feels comfortable noticing changes in sensation. Are we able to notice that? Are we able to be with that, in a way that cultivates some kindness and some compassion and awareness?
It's really interesting. So, I'm going to go back to the supervision point, and what I want to sort of say is, as you're talking about this, what comes to mind, and this is for all the folks who are listening who are like, oh, this sounds really interesting. I want to find a practitioner who could help me do this, right? Is it's how important it is you find someone who's been trained to do this, and not just some schlub who says, oh, I took a 6-week mindfulness course on my own, so now I know how to teach people mindfulness. Like, BS, you're going to do harm to those folks. Like, find folks who, like Fiona, clearly like knows a path to take that is going to be safe for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we've talked a lot about safety today, and that's one of the key missing pieces, I think, particularly for dietitians, and perhaps more broadly, we could extend that to other health practitioners as well. Is, we're so busy kind of doing to our clients rather than helping them to understand the various mechanisms that they have developed.
Yeah.
The various very effective mechanisms. Which they can be effective and they can be hurting us at the same time. Like, it's a both and. It doesn't need to be either or. And that maybe a life that is better quality or feels more connected. Understanding how to gradually develop safety mechanisms that are more workable rather than harmful is, it's a pretty critical way forward.
One of the interesting things that I find in learning more about mindfulness, and seeing its intersections with Hayes, is also wondering like, are there places where it diverges in some ways? So I guess my question for you is, how does mindfulness play within health at every size? Do you see it as like diverging in some places? And if not, why, or if so, why?
Yeah, my gosh, that is such an important question. I really understand why you ask that, Aaron. I really appreciate that. So, one of the things, of course, that we know about co-opting from the wisdom traditions, or co-opting cultural practices, is that it enacts like power over positions, and it reinforces oppressive systems, right? So mindfulness definitely is part of that, which I feel deeply sad about, if I'm honest. So there are elements of the way in which modern mindfulness finds its way into maybe yoga studios, or maybe psychology practices, maybe dietetic practices, maybe university settings, schools, etc., which perhaps, well, I'm going to give grace and say it's an unintentional way that unfortunately enacts the very power structures that we're trying to dismantle through health at every size. So I feel deeply sad about that. So I just want to note at this point that I am somebody who shows up in the world with a shit ton of privileges. I'm a smaller-bodied, white, cisgender, heterosexual, married, have kids, I'm educated. I have so many privileges, and alongside that, in my own social justice work, in my own personal work, mindfulness has absolutely been key to things like noticing my own biases, how they show up, in very sneaky ways as well. It's not always overt. Like, I don't go around, spouting or writing about, speaking in fat phobic ways or in racist ways, or et cetera, et cetera. But my goodness, we all as humans hold biases, which are a result of being raised in a culture which is just so, it doesn't help us to have an inclusive, social justice oriented lens. It really doesn't. So what mindfulness has done is really, well, first of all, it's helped me to notice the way that my biases show up in both overt and covert ways, rather than going down the shame spiral So in your interview with Jessica Wilson, one aspect of that I really appreciated was the way that she spoke about that people tend to go down shame spirals when they realize that, they have participated in enacting harm against folks, particularly folks who have experienced marginalisation. And I think what mindfulness does, well, for me personally, is it helps me to notice if I'm starting down that spiral, and really encourages me to kind of envelop myself more in kindness and compassion, which in a way that doesn't let me off the hook, so that it still holds me accountable to doing the work, whilst also giving myself some space for my own very humanness, I guess. So that's the way in which I guess I use personally mindfulness, and that's the way when I'm speaking about mindfulness, for example, to dietetic students or other dietitians or in my yoga classes, this is the way that I use it. I explain, the intersection of the two. So the other aspect of it, which might be helpful to share, is that mindfulness is not about being okay with what is unjust. It's actually the opposite to that. It invites us to bring attention to not only our own human experience, but then the experiences of other people and more broadly in the world. And that when we are more okay with our own pain and suffering, we are in such a better position to be with the suffering of others, to be with the pain of others. We're less likely to jump in and do that, the righting reflex or the fixing thing that dietitians tend to do. We're more likely to be able to witness other people's pain and suffering. We're more likely to notice things that are unjust in the world and therefore be able to take action against that, rather than feeling, nervous that we're going to mess it up or that we're not going to do it, quote unquote, correctly, and therefore do nothing at all. And we're also more likely to be self-reflective as well. So I'm really super curious about your thoughts on that. And maybe I very much could have, it's very likely I've missed something here. So I'm really curious about your thoughts on that, because that's just been my personal experience, I guess. But I'm very open to hearing otherwise.
Well, I think there's a couple things that, and again, I know probably more about health at every size than the mindfulness part of it. But I think that co-opting piece has always been interesting. I think a lot of people, or not a lot of people, I think I've seen where mindfulness gets co-opted into that weight loss like jargon as well.
Yes.
I saw it firsthand at the VA when I ran the weight loss program, right? As they taught mindfulness classes, right? But it was a part of weight loss. So I see that. But the other thing, and so I didn't know about the social justice part, so that you just mentioned, and I think that brings a lot of sort of commonality to me, in hearing that. The thing that with both, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think that is very interesting, is something I just alluded to a few minutes ago, is how easy it is for folks to say, I'm an expert, or I'm practicing from this paradigm with very little training. And to me, that is a commonality that is, shows up in a lot of things, obviously, but within health at every size and mindfulness, that is really frustrating, because people say, oh no, I get it, I'm doing health at every size work, and then they're talking about, but if you're in a larger body, you should probably lose weight, right? Or bullshit like that. And so I that's one thing I would find. I would say there's like this space where people might just say, oh, I've done a little bit of research, I've read a book, I've done a webinar, and now I'm ready to go out and do it. And that bothers me, because it can, again, like I said, potentially do harm.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with you. And I think it's probably, thinking on the fly, I think it's born from, for health professionals, it's probably born from this sense of that I have to know the answer, and I have to know it intellectually, and if I know it intellectually, then I can go and do this thing to people, not even with people, to people. It becomes another thing to do. It becomes like another ticker box, another skill, another Whereas I do see mindfulness as a skill, but I see mindfulness as a practice. It is a practice that is very personal, and that can be used very consciously and deliberately so that we are being very intentional with how we use our time, how we use our energy, how we use our thoughts, how we use our ourselves, how we use our existence in the world. So I think for me, that's where the intersection kind of happens. And I completely agree with you, Aaron. I find it very frustrating, if I'm honest, because what happens, of course, and I know that you two, are on board with this, is that it starts to lead body inclusive, social justice oriented approaches. It starts to water it down. It starts to make it appear in the world in ways which is completely separate to or different to its origins. And I think that can, to be honest, I think that can only come from maturity and supervision.
Yeah, there we are.
Yeah.
That's
really.
I have just a thought popped in. I don't even know where I'm going with this question. So just, bear with me. I think of mindfulness, and I think we're all very lovely middle-class people and we have a lot of economic advantages. And I'm just thinking of, because Aaron and I both worked at the VA, and I'm thinking of my clients there, my patients there, that, if you're poor, if you don't have much money, if you're kind of stuck somewhere that you don't want to be stuck, how is mindfulness accessible to that, to that situation where, hey, being in the present moment is actually really shitty.
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Like maybe you know what I'm saying?
Yep,
Without me actually saying anything coherent.
No, I do. I think what I would, if anybody's curious about this, I would point them to one of the most brilliant books ever read, and that is Viktor Frankl's A Man's Search for Meaning.
Ah, yes.
So Viktor Frankl was in concentration camps. I can't remember which country, but yeah, he was in concentration camps, I think, for 3 years. And so what he wrote about is the human capacity to be able to decide to make choices, one's own choices from moment to moment, even in the midst of the most enormous suffering. And so that book was really formative for me. In fact, having this conversation now makes me realize I haven't gone back and reread it in about 5 years, so I probably need to go back and freshen up a little bit. But I think one of the things is that mindfulness is not just for the good stuff, it's for all the stuff. It's, when we can come in contact with our pain and our suffering, it doesn't mean that we like it. It doesn't mean that we're inviting more of it. What it does mean is that we're acknowledging this is what's happening for me right now. And some people have a lot of pain and a lot of suffering, and some people have less. But what I really love about mindfulness is its accessibility for everybody, regardless of our degree of pain and suffering. And some might argue, actually, if I think about it, that mindfulness is the most helpful when we are in moments of our greatest suffering rather than our, happy, joyful moments. Actually, the power of it is really in being able to soothe ourselves and remind us of our innate human worthiness in deepest moments of suffering. And, talking about VA, for example, if we are surrounded by caring, compassionate health professionals, which can actually remind us of our innate human value and worth, then that strengthens our capacity to be able to give that to ourselves as well.
Say that piece again. Say it again.
The last one?
Yeah, about being surrounded by caring professionals.
Oh, okay, cool. All right. I kind of just talk and then I'm like, I can't remember what I just said.
Same here.
Sorry.
Same here.
So when people are in moments or times or years of the greatest of suffering, then being surrounded by caring people, whether those are family members, partners, or health professionals, who can remind them with their words and actions of their innate value and worth, then alongside people suffering, they can come in greater contact with their own value and worth in a way that is truly healing. And I really think that's for a lot of us what we're here to do, is to bear witness to our own suffering, to our own pain, and bear witness to other people's pain and suffering in a way that allows us to be with it, and therefore come in contact with joy and come in contact with our own innate value.
Okay. And the reason I wanted to hear that again was because I was sort of, as you were saying, I was directly thinking, when I worked at the VA, I worked on a team of, we did home-based primary care, and we went into, people's homes. And in LA, that can be, very well-off people, but generally it's not. And I realized that, our team is really respected, and we did a lot of really good work and, helping people be at home and be cared for. And what I'm realizing is that what you just said, I sort of witnessed in that team, which was, everybody was really caring on that team. And I think it really improved people's lives to have those caring professionals.
Absolutely.
Reminding them that they were worth this kind of care. So
absolutely.
So it's almost like we can pass this mindfulness on to people. So we, the professionals, can be mindful, and in that way we are sort of bringing it to people that might be in significant pain. I think that's what you were saying.
Exactly. Yeah, our presence really, really matters, particularly when people are in pain, and when we're in pain too. Like the way that we are present to our own pain and the pain of others, it really matters. It is deeply healing. And if we think about all that we want as humans, we just want to be connected. We just want to be seen. We just want to be witnessed. That's all. Like, it doesn't even get much more complicated than that. That's actually all we need. And it doesn't mean that we don't suffer. It doesn't mean that we're not in pain. It doesn't mean that shitty things don't happen. They do. But if we can be witnessed and our pain held by somebody who can be okay with their own pain, because if we're all over the place with our own suffering, we can't be with the pain of others. And that's how mindfulness is so powerful. And
that's how we can improve the lives of others with this, and not just our own lives.
Exactly. Yeah, this is not just it is a deeply personal practice, but the broader purpose, as I see it, is to show up in the world as a better person and to, make contributions to the world, which really make a difference to people who don't have as many privileges as we do.
Yeah. This has been a really deep, profound conversation, I feel like.
Yeah.
I feel like we should all have like our beer or our wine with us. Like
totally.
That's usually how we're with
your
you.
CBD pills, all that stuff, right?
Yeah. Maybe we should put that on the header. Get your wine. Fiona's going deep.
Yeah, that's right. Let's go deep real quick.
Yeah. But I loved everything you said. And this is like, when I listen to you, I feel like I'm having my own supervision moment. And I feel like I learned so much from you. And I also just want you to record some kind of a mindfulness meditation for Insight Timer or something, so I can hear your voice when I do my meditation, because you always feel like the most comforting voice, and what you say is always so comforting. So
I hope there's some F-bombs in there too when you do it, by the way.
Well, do you know what's so funny, Aaron, is that so for example, when I'm teaching yoga, there's like Fee's yoga voice.
Mm-hmm.
And the meditation voice, and then there's like my regular voice.
Yes, right.
Where I'm like, what the fuck? And like you two know me really very well, and so I have an upbeat style.
Yes.
I guess I would say. Whereas when I'm doing mindfulness, meditation, yoga, and stuff, it's the yoga voice, and everyone, all my class members, they just laugh at me. They're like, "This is not you at all."
But I did a yoga class with you, and I have to say it was the best yoga class, that I feel that I've ever done.
Bless you.
Because one, it wasn't hard.
Namaste, Glenys.
Yeah, when it didn't hurt in any way.
Yeah, right.
And it really was about, I felt like you really got into the true sense of yoga. not that I know anything about that, but
that's what I was banking on. I was
right.
Like, I hope they don't know anything about yoga, because if I mess it up, then nobody will know.
Right. No, you knew more than everybody in that class. And it was fantastic because it felt like, oh, if this is what yoga is, I could do this. It's just, you're in LA, you're not going to find a lot of people like that, I think. Although we do know people that will, we just talked to Meg Bradbury and, so.
Love Meg. She's so cool.
Of course. Yeah. And she swears like a sailor, just like you. So I've never met any sailors. Do they actually swear a lot? I mean, I guess.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Not all of them.
Oh.
I mean, Gilligan hardly ever swore.
Yeah. And look where that got him, stuck on an island for how many years?
They got rescued.
Did he eventually?
Yeah.
Yeah, because then they did
the show
all the
didn't
specials.
end with them like just shriveling up and,
Yeah,
being
they
like,
did, and then they turned it into like a hotel and all sorts of terrible things. So, yeah. Yeah.
I can't believe we've ended on Gilligan's Island.
Yes. And the Gen X portion has been completed.
Yes.
Check that box.
Thank you. Exactly.
Well, Fiona, this has been amazing. We probably are not going to get to see you for a while, so this has been fortifying to get to talk to you in this way. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so sad. And yet, this has been really amazing. I just, I adore both of you so much and just appreciate so much what you bring to the world. So I really appreciate you having me here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what do you want people to know about what you're doing and where to find you and all that good stuff?
Okay, so I'll cut straight to the chase. So my business is called the Mindful Dietitian, remembering that a dietitian is spelt Dietitian, same as Dietitians Unplugged. Just look at the name of the podcast and then you'll get the spelling correct.
Yes.
And that's .com.au because obviously I'm in Australia. And then I'm same name on Facebook, same name on Instagram, where I do like to play around. I do appreciate Instagram. It's a very friendly place, unlike Twitter, which is just full of
fuckery.
People looking for a fight. Oh my God, it's kind of scary. I don't like Twitter. Brings out my avoidance of conflict. Definitely. I'm like, this is a scary place. So, my main service is I offer training, education and supervision specifically for dietitians. So if anybody's looking for a supervisor to join a supervision group, then I also, not only me, but I also list other people's services as well, because I really think that having a community of people is incredibly important. So yeah, the Mindful Dietitian isn't just referring to me. It's also, this community that Aaron and Glenys, you're both very much a part of. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
Awesome.
Cool.
And we'll link to all of that in the show notes too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on the show. Be safe. We hope everything in Australia is managed well, just like with our lovely president here. Sarcasm alert. And hopefully we'll get to see you soon. But thanks for coming on the show, Fiona.
Thank you so much for having me.